Hello and welcome to In the Kitchen with Mary Mac. Today we're making blueberry pie. Blueberries are just starting to ripen here in western Pennsylvania, and we were fortunate to get some at our neighbor's Dawson's Orchard, which is just on the very northern edge of Enon Valley. It's in what I call the Tri-City area, which is Wampum, Mount Jackson, Mahoningtown triangle there. Dawson's is a beautiful orchard. They grow several varieties of apples, peaches, pears, plums, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. Not schnozberries, though. That was Willy Wonka. So we went over. I heard they had blueberries, and we went over and got some, and they were beautiful. I always have to buy like an extra quart because I eat so many of them while I'm doing anything. I highly recommend them as a place to get fruit. It's Dawson's Orchard. Just look them up online. They have a lot of good social media. Blueberry pie is a tricky pie to make because the blueberries are self-contained, so they don't juice. When you put sugar on them, juice doesn't leak out of them, okay? So a lot of times what happens when you make a blueberry pie is it'll taste gritty because the sugar didn't get hot enough to melt during baking. And I've had this happen a few times where you get this gritty feeling in the pie because you think it baked long enough. You know, you go by time, you think it baked long enough, and it just didn't get to that good boil, which causes some of the blueberries to explode and make a nice juice for your pie. So that's a tip that I can say when you're making a blueberry pie. You want to make sure that the juice boils up through the crust and you can see that it's thickening before you take it out of the oven. This pie took almost an hour to bake because the juice bubbled up, but I could tell that it wasn't thick when it bubbled up. So I waited. Typically my pies, I bake them at 400 and they take about 45 minutes to bake. This one took 55 minutes. So it was a long bake, but you have to do that with a blueberry pie or you might risk having that gritty sugar in there. So here we go. You're going to need a little over a quart of blueberries. So I put on my note here that I'm having a hard time reading 1 quart plus 1 cup of blueberries. So it ended up being like 5 cups of blueberries, I believe, I put into the pie. It may have been even more than that. I don't know. I was feeling crazy with the blueberries. You want to have a quart and a cup of blueberries. The first thing you're going to do is get your blueberries, put them in a colander and rinse them really well, and then let them drain and pour them out onto a clean cotton towel to dry because you want them to be nice and dry. And while they're on that towel, what I do is I roll them around with the palms of my hands, and then I check for stems and leaves and anything that might be on them because you don't want to have a stem in your pie, okay? So while once you get your blueberries, rolled on the towel and just kind of let them sit there and dry, you can gather up your other ingredients. So this is a 2-crust pie. If you do it the way I do it, you're going to be using 1 whole box of pie crusts that come pre-made from the grocery store. I've tried a couple times and I'm trying different techniques and I just can't get back into the pie crust thing. I'm ruined.
Bread and pastry are 2 entirely different sciences.
I know, and I'm ruined. I don't have that touch. I don't have the touch anymore. And I've even tried like tips that people have given me, and it's not working. So I just buy a package of 2 pie crusts, and that's what I use, and it works really well. So what you want to do, you got your pie crust. You want to let them sit out for about 10 minutes. You don't want them to get warm, but you want them to sit out long enough so that they're not freezing cold and they crack, when you unroll them. For the pie, you need a 1/2 cup of sugar, 1/3 cup of flour, a teaspoon of lemon juice, and this goes in with the blueberries. Then you need a tablespoon of milk. You can use regular milk or soy or a nut milk, and a tablespoon of sugar, and that goes on your top crust of your pie. So you've rinsed and sorted your berries and you've gone over them. They're on the towel. They're pretty dry. You're going to get a small bowl and mix your sugar and flour well. Pour your blueberries into a large bowl and then pour that mixture of sugar and flour over them and toss the berries to coat. And since, like I said, like if you do this with rhubarb or apples or peaches or raspberries or blackberries, the sugar will draw the juice out of that fruit and begin to make the thicker syrup that is in your pie. So what you want to do with blueberries, since you're not going to draw that juice out of them, you're going to toss them every few minutes, like 3 to 4 minutes. Go over, and I take a big spoon and I just turn them over to keep that sugar and flour kind of distributed through the berries so it's not settling down in the bottom, and just kind of keep that going. And you want to do this for about maybe 15 minutes to a half an hour and get your berries, keep them so that they keep getting coated. You can get your pies out and you want to let them set for, like I said, about 10 minutes before you start to work them. So take one of the crusts and put it into a 9-inch pie plate and, adjust it into place. Now you want to pour in your sugared, floured blueberries carefully into the pie crust. And what I'll do is I'll start around the outside edge and I'll take that big spoon and just make sure if there's any sugar and flour that's kind of in a pile in there, try to distribute it around the berries. And I just keep going until the bowl's empty. And if you end up with a lot of sugar and flour in the bottom, you can just take your spoon and sprinkle it around on the blueberries. And then once you've got that, you might need to draw your blueberries in from the edge of the crust so that you have room to pinch your top and bottom crust together and just kind of arrange them so they're higher in the middle. Now put your top crust on, and then you want to, with your fingertips, press the top and bottom crust together. If the top crust is like way overhanging the bottom crust or the pie pan, you can take a knife and trim that off. And then take your thumb and pointer finger, and I usually do both hands, and I go around and I pinch the crust real tight the whole way around. And then after I've pinched it, I take my thumb and pointer finger of my left hand and the pointer finger of my right hand, and I go around and I press it to make a little kind of a ridgy edge on it to make sure it's sealed well. So once you do that, you get that tablespoon of milk. And I get a pastry brush, and I'll take that and brush it over the top of the pie. And then take the tablespoon of sugar and sprinkle that over the milk. And then that gives it a nice, crispy, shiny crust, when it's baking. Then I take my paring knife and I cut slots into it to release steam. And also it lets that juice come out so you can see, when the gel around the fruit is thick enough, to take it out. So I usually cut like 8 slits in it. You want to preheat your oven to 400 degrees for this pie. You can actually do that before you put the blueberries into the crust. Get your oven preheating at 400 degrees. And then I tear a big piece of foil, square or slightly oblong, so that it's bigger than your pie plate. And I put that in my oven to set my pie plate on, because it's a little more practical than putting a pan underneath, because sometimes if your pie boils over, I swear that stuff turns into like some strange kind of super glue or JB Weld. It will cement your pie plate to like a pizza pan.
It's J Blueberry Weld.
Yeah, J Blueberry Weld. I've done that several times and I'm like, I hate that so much. So I tear a piece of foil and put it into the oven. And then I very carefully, when I put my pie into the oven, I set it in the middle of that foil and adjust it to make sure that if the pie boils over, it hits the foil. And believe me, number one, this saves you from cleaning your oven. And number two, it saves you from cleaning a pan. And number three, it saves you from cementing your pie plate to the pizza pan, which I've done numerous times. There you go. So once you have that and your pie's on your foil, set your timer for 30 minutes. And this is at 400 degrees. Just put it in there and keep an eye on it. Now, usually in 30 minutes, nothing's happening. Your crust will start to brown up somewhat. It's getting hot and everything, but you're not boiling anything out. At 30 minutes, very carefully, give your pie a half turn and then put it for 15 more minutes. You don't have to cover the pie or anything because now it's just getting brown. It's not dark or anything. And then keep an eye on it. When you get to the 45-minute mark, you should be seeing some boiling syrup happening. If not, don't panic. What I do is I put 5 more minutes on and then 5 more minutes, until I see it. And usually what happens is it'll start to boil out and it'll be very shiny when you first see it. And then when it starts to get to where it's getting thick, it'll kind of lose that shine and it'll get like a satin look to it. And then you can also tell by the boiling, it'll look like lava. And you'll know that syrup's nice and thick. And then you'll know your pie is done. That's a really good way to tell that any fruit pie is done, though. When that syrup boils up and it's nice and thick, then because you want that. If that doesn't happen, if you don't let your pie bake long enough and you don't get that nice thick syrup coming up through, when you cool your pie and cut it, it'll just be this real runny and it'll run all out. It may still run all out when it's thick, which, that does happen. But usually once you put that pie in the refrigerator, it sets up it's a photograph. It's so gorgeous. That's another thing you can do. Once your pie is done, you take that out of the oven and cool it on a rack until it's room temperature. If you're baking this like the day before something, or if you want to make sure that it's thickened up, once it gets to the point where it's at room temperature, put it in the refrigerator a couple of hours or overnight, and it will thicken up perfectly. It'll be fantastic. This pie is terrific with vanilla ice cream. Boy, I've sure eaten a lot of pie this week. I hate to say it. I made 3 pies this week. But this pie was just terrific with ice cream. It came out so good. And what happens is some of the blueberries will burst, so you'll get a lot of juice. But then others of them, it's like some of them are completely whole. So it's really kind of neat. I love making pies because it's like a big science experiment that you can eat at the end. This one came out really good, but like I said, it's really good with vanilla ice cream, and it's just such a good pie. And I love a couple things about this recipe. Number one, this recipe, you could even call this just a berry pie recipe. This pie recipe works with blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, black raspberries. Any kind of a berry works with this recipe. And I'll tell you why. Your sugar to flour ratio, it might seem like you have a lot of flour in here, but what you want to make a lot of juice out of your berries, and you want to have a nice amount of syrup in there to hold the berries in. But number two, you're only using a half cup of sugar. That's not much sugar at all for a pie, but it's perfect because berries tend to be on the sweeter side, and you don't want a lot of sugar because it becomes too sweet. I like a pie that leans towards tart. I do not like a super sweet pie. The teaspoon of lemon juice, even, a lot of blueberry recipes or berry recipes in general will call for 1 or 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and then the only thing you can taste is the lemon juice. This is perfect. You don't taste the lemon juice. You get a little smell of it, but it's just there to help thicken things up. You can use fresh lemon juice or bottled lemon juice. Either one is fine. Fresh lemon juice gives it a little bit different flavor, but still good. It's a reasonably simple recipe, and it's a good technique. And like I said, your most important thing with the blueberries is you have to make sure that syrup comes up bubbling thick through the crust before you pull it from the oven, because if not, you'll have a gritty textured syrup in there because your sugar didn't all dissolve. So there you go. There's your blueberry pie. Now, you've got about a month of blueberries, so this gives you, I'm going to say you should be able to make this 3 or 4 times to get it perfected. And if you have a good pie crust, by all means use it. I don't want to dissuade anyone from making their delicious pie crust. It's just that I can't. So, happy baking and enjoy your pie.
And make sure to check us out online on Facebook at Mary Mac Bakehouse, on Instagram at Mary Mac Bakehouse and Mary Mac Podcast, on Twitter at Mobile Mary Mac, and on our website, marymacpodcast.com.
Thanks a lot for listening if you did, and if you didn't, too bad for you.